Hi. The film I'll be talking about today is In Cold Blood. This film was released in 1967 and stars Robert Blake, Scott Wilson, and John Forsythe. This film is based on the novel by the same name, In Cold Blood, by Truman Capote. That novel came out in 1966. This comes out a year later. Both the novel and the movie are worthy of the expression masterpiece. I first saw this movie when I was a teenager. This was during the time when Robert Blake's life was, in shambles, when he'd been accused of murdering his wife at the time. And this film comes on TCM where he's, in fact, playing a killer. So I just had this curiosity about this guy. I had heard about him, how he played Beretta on this TV show and was a child actor and was in the show Our Gang. And, I knew who he was, but I didn't really know anything else about him. What I'd heard basically was all news to me and revolved around the news story at the time. When I saw his performance in this film, this truly is an Academy Award type performance. He should have won something for this. Is one of the better acting performances I've ever seen. And what's even more remarkable, Scott Wilson, who's in the film with him, also delivers that type of performance. It's two actors at their peak together, playing men who are capable of something so inhumane, and yet they bring a certain humanity to these characters, and they make them people and not caricatures, which would have been so easy to do. And the interesting thing about this film is initially they wanted Steve McQueen and Paul Newman for the parts of the killers. And they said, Brooke said no, because that'll just end up romanticizing the killers and they bring too much baggage. And that's kind of like what they did with Bonnie and Clyde. You give Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. Now Clyde and Bonnie Parker in real life were attractive, but sometimes people's cachet at the time almost distracts from the characters that they're playing. And it was better to have two relative somewhat unknowns who don't bring any of that baggage to these parts, so that you just see them as Perry Smith, who Robert Blake plays, and Dick Hickok, who Scott Wilson plays. And this is one of those that every time you see it, you'll come away with something new. That's been my experience. The editing of this film, Quincy Jones also did the music for this film. And the thing about this film is, going into it, and when it was released in 1967, the book, as I've just mentioned, In Cold Blood, had come out the year before and was an enormous hit. This was really the first type of true crime book of that stature that was written with a novel-like prose that Truman Capote used. And what's even more interesting is, before Capote had written In Cold Blood, his previous work was Breakfast at Tiffany's. You couldn't be more far away. And he wrote about these true things, but his prose was that of fiction, even though he was talking about something that was completely nonfiction. This really had happened. And he had been to Kansas and immersed himself in this case. He got to know the townspeople, and if you've read the book, he really brings not just the killers to life and the clutters, but the community and what something like this can do to a community like the one in Holcomb, Kansas. That things like this just don't happen there. And this is the farmland, this is the heartland, and the clutters represented that. And then you have these two guys who live on the periphery, on the outside of society, Perry Smith and Dick Hickok. And they represent this other world. And then when they decide to come in to rob this family, it's the colliding of the two worlds. And when this film came out, everybody's read the book. It's a hit. So nobody's going into the theater not knowing what's coming. And watching this movie, knowing what's going to happen to the clutters, knowing the ride that we're in on, it gives this uneasy tension that we feel right from the get-go. And the film starts off with a shot. It's just dark at night, and you see the headlights of this bus coming down the road. And then immediately, We see this girl walking down the bus. We see somebody strike a match, and it's Robert Blake lighting his cigarette as Perry Smith. And he just has this kind of weird look. We then see Dick Hickok at his home, and we see him opening something up where there's a shotgun, and he's getting out, and he's kind of preparing. And then we see the Clutters, these people that we know are about to be victims of this heinous crime. And we have Quincy Jones's music accompanying it at this kind of frenetic pace. And it works because it's this kind of eerie jazz sound to it. And it builds the tension beautifully. And Brooks did such a great job with the edits and cuts in this film, knowing when to make them, when to go from Perry to Hickok to the Clutter family. And we all know it's just this inevitable climb until they come together. And not knowing when in the film that's going to happen. And you're truly, I hate cliches like on the edge of your seat, but there's this sense of doom because we know. We know. And what's weird is watching it as a viewer, you're almost sitting there thinking maybe it won't have to happen. And the thing that Brooks did is we really get somewhat to experience the Clutters as people before this crime takes place. We see the daughter's room and the ribbons that are up on the wall. We see the son who's working on something in the basement. And when the dad come down, he's getting rid of the cigarette. We see the 4-H thing on the wall. I mean, these people make Ozzie and Harriet look like the Osbournes. I mean, this is truly middle America at its best. And seeing that edited with what the killers are talking about, them, they're doomed and they don't know it. And seeing them going about their day like any other day, and yet we know what's in store for them. And we know those men are on the road, on their way to them. And they're just sitting ducks. They have no idea that evil is on its way to disrupt their world. And when we first hear Blake speak in the film as Perry Smith, when he makes a phone call to try to contact the Reverend at the Kansas State Penitentiary, we immediately know that there's something wrong here. His voice has a vulnerability to it. It's like a tremble when he talks. He's a stocky guy, he's a tough-looking guy, but we get the feeling this is somebody who has been damaged. And it reminds me of if you've ever been to a humane society and you come across certain animals and they're like the previous owner really abused it and you notice it doesn't act like the other. This is somebody who has a past, and you just see it in everything about him. And he calls, and we get the sense that he's looking for a way out early on, because he's like he's fighting against it, but thinking this has to happen, this will happen. We are going to do this. And he speaks to the Reverend, and he's kind of like, go back. You've already broken parole by quitting your job. Don't go into, don't cross state lines. And the phone call just kind of ends. And then we next see him in the washroom. He's kind of in the restroom there at the bus station, kind of cleaning himself up. And then Dick Hickok emerges, and we see that, and this is used in the film a lot, he has these flashbacks to his childhood. And while he's standing there in the mirror, he has a flashback where he's like playing the guitar and singing in Vegas. And we realize that these dreams are kind of places where he goes as a coping mechanism. And then Hickok kind of snaps him out of it, and they're off and on their way. And Hickok is not as sympathetic a character as Smith, and Scott Wilson plays him masterfully. He has this kind of cockiness, this way with people, this self-assured quality. Nothing seems to bother him. He's everything Perry Smith isn't. And we kind of sense that he sees this violent, tortured side in Smith, which is why he knew he would need him for this kind of job. Because make no mistake about it, on their way down, they say, we're not leaving any witnesses. We're going to blow hair all over that wall. But Hickok knows that he might not have the fortitude to carry that out, the blankness, he doesn't know if he can go to that place. But he knows that Smith could, and he's going to manipulate that. He needs that. And when you can spot someone else's vulnerability, someone else's shortcomings, and the first thing you think is how that could be of use to you. And that's what we can tell he's doing. And on the way down, the way in which they speak with each other, the kind of cavalier nature of, they're just about their day. And this is just something they're getting ready to go do. And then it'll cut back to the Clutters. Cuts to Kansas, them living their everyday life, and then them coming down that highway in that car. And we're sitting there thinking, it's just, your skin crawls watching it. And as a viewer, you almost wish there was something you could do, even though that's completely irrational. We know how this is going to end. And yet, every time I have seen it, you're almost hoping it doesn't go the way it's going to go, which is completely irrational, but I guess is a tribute to Brooks that he can kind of conjure that response out of us. And as they slowly make their way there, and we see the sign that says Clutter Family Farm. And they're coming down that long highway at night. And Perry, finally, when they get there, says, let's get out now while there's still time. Hickok's not having it. We came this far, we're doing this. And then, cuts. The next day, somebody who was going to go pick the family up for church has their entire world shattered. They're discovered. And then we see Perry listening to the people on the radio talk about this crime that has taken place. And we find out that the thing about the safe was a complete fabrication that Hickok had heard from a former cellmate when he was in the penitentiary, the guy that came in to serve with him after Perry had left. And had said that Herb Clutter had this safe at his farm with $10,000 in it. Well, they know now that was all a lie. But they've killed everybody. And as Robert Blake says, for what? For a radio? For $40? We got nothing. And seeing what this crime then did to the community. And it's at this time that we're introduced to another character played by John Forsythe. And he plays the lead detective for the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And he does a great job here. He's probably best known for like Bachelor Father, that was a show on in the early 60s. And he also was the voice on Charlie's Angels. But he plays this detective so convincingly. And seeing him survey the house and know that this community has been rocked. This is not the kind of thing you expect to see in a place like this, to people like this. And even if they're able to get it solved, things don't just go back to normal. You've been robbed of something. And that's what victims of burglary say all the time about their own homes, is that the biggest thing is that they don't even feel safe in their own home anymore. They've been robbed of that security. Well, now that's happened to an entire town in Kansas. And what Brooks did that was smart is he used people that were the Clutters' neighbors as extras in the film. He let them come in, and it adds that authenticity to this film. And it was so smart of him to do that. He had John Forsythe really talk to the detective. This was not about sensationalism. This was really about giving the crime, the family, the victims, the perpetrators. It was almost about, we got to do this as accurate as possible so that this isn't some exploitation gimmick. That this is like, let's get it out on the table so we can look at it and see what it tells us about us as a society, that we're a world in which this can happen. It's among us. Those that we, like to think don't exist, they're out there. And they come to places we never think they would come, and people that we never thought would have an act like this put upon them. It can happen. And seeing them come to terms with that, seeing the loss of innocence for a community. Because there's a scene where a guy says, "When are you guys going to get this solved? My wife's afraid to go to the bathroom at night." And them knowing that they have an enormous undertaking at hand. Because the citizens here, this is a tight-knit community. They didn't just lose a neighbor, they got people they considered family. And eventually, the Hickok and Smith make their way to Mexico. Eventually, they have to come back. And they're passing hot checks and they're stealing cars. And they make their way to Vegas. But before that, the inmate that had shared the cell with Dick Hickok and told him this thing about the safe comes forward and tells them, "I think this is why he did it. I did tell him that. I never thought something like this would happen." They finally track them down, pull them over for being in a stolen car, passing bad checks, get them in the interrogation room. Both of them are unflappable. They're not cracking. And it's cutting back and forth between Perry and Smith. And eventually they bring in the shoes that the guys were wearing. They show the photographs. And they show that to Dick Hickok, played by Wilson. And it's at that moment he cracks. He knows they got him. Prints match up. And he just looks and says, "I wasn't the trigger man. Don't charge me with first-degree murder." Then we see them traveling in the car with Perry Smith. And they said, "He told us about how you killed that guy in Vegas years ago." And when he says that, Blake knows his friend has sold him out. He's cracked. And he said, "I knew he'd bring that up. I knew if you guys put the squeeze on him and he confessed, he'd throw everything out there." He said, "Truth is, I never killed anybody until that night. And now the detectives know. They've got the confession." And he hands him the cigarette. And then we as an audience know, now we're going to see what happened that night. And Blake's narration, that tremble, that sadness, as he's telling, like that this seemed to be something that just had to happen beyond him. And we are taken once again to that night where they're outside the house, except this time we're going to see them go in. And as I said earlier, how they used extras from the community, and they really shot in the community where this happened. This scene takes place in the home where the Clutters were killed. This is the actual house. I didn't know that until recently when I rewatched the film. Knowing that gave me goosebumps, because the scene in general, without knowing that, is so disturbing. They just go right in the house with these flashlights. Wake up, and when they wake Mr. Clutter up, he doesn't, go and scream, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He kind of, the way we all would at first, it kind of jumps, but he doesn't scream. It's not exaggerated. It's real. He's confused. Who? And they got the gun, and they're basically saying what they're there to do. And he keeps his composure. And he tells them, "Look, I don't know what you've heard. I'll give you what I have, but there's no safe." Well, Hickok's incredulous. He's not buying it. And he's "Please don't scare my wife. Please don't do this. She's got ill health." And Hickok's basically, "Buddy, you just tell us where that safe is and where the money is." And seeing them with the flashlights make their way through the house, and how they're not moving like professional people, like these experienced burglars, that this is just kind of unfolding and awkwardly, as it really probably would. There's no playbook for how to break into a house and make it seamless. And seeing him try to no avail to explain to them, "I don't know who told you what, but I've got nothing." And then, the son of and then they get them down to the basement. They go get the daughter. They tie her up. They tie the mother's hands. And Perry looks at him and says, "We've been duped. We're here for nothing. There is no safe." He's come to terms with it. The whole reason for being there is null and void. Whatever tip you got was completely erroneous. And look at where we are now. Hickok is somewhat undeterred. There's a point where he goes upstairs and he is going to rape the daughter. And Perry will not put up with this, and he stops him. And Hickok kind of looks at him and he says, "Look, you can have your turn too." And his face kind of changes at that moment. And he said, "Nobody's doing anything." And gets him out of there. And it's so odd, like you're doing this ghastly thing you're about to carry, and yet even in this moment you have some twinge of morality. And then the scene with Blake and the daughter of the Clutter family talking together. And he kind of turns it, and he sees the ribbons on the wall. He sees a picture of her on a horse. He looks at the horse. He even tells her about his mother. He asks, "Is she in school?" She says, "I'm going to be going to university next year." He opens up this change purse and a silver dollar rolls out. Falls out of it, or he has it and drops it. And then he gets there and he's reaching for it. A silver dollar. How ludicrous that he's talking to her like they're two strangers sitting on a park bench, and then this guy that came here for $10,000 is now reaching under a bed, who's got a bad leg, reaching for a silver dollar. And then when he goes downstairs, he himself says that, like, what? And he has a break. And he takes and he slaps it down. And then he has the flashback to his father. And we see the father with a gun on him saying, "Take a good last look. I'm the last thing you're ever going to see." And then he's in motion. He's carrying this out. Cuts the father's throat. Grabs the gun, shoots him. Shoots the son. And we see Hickok kind of backing up because he sees that he's crossed over now. He's gone to that place. Goes up the steps. We see him dragging his leg. Goes into the room. We hear the gunshot go off, kill a mother. And then we see the daughter's face, the tears coming down. We see her club. She knows what's coming. And that's it. And then we're back in the car after he's told all this. And this is probably one of the creepiest lines I've ever heard. He said it had nothing to do with them. They were just there. I thought Mr. Clutter was a nice man, right up until the time I cut his throat. You don't hear stuff like that every day. You don't hear dialogue that painstakingly, peculiarly honest. And this is true too, and it's in the book and they captured it in the film. What they noticed when they first went to that crime scene, the son had a pillow placed behind his head. There was no reason to have done that other than to make him somewhat comfortable. You're going to carry this out, and you're actually, before you do it though, like, "Here, I know this is uncomfortable, take this pillow." How do you explain something like that? Here's the problem: you can't. We're only left with questions. We have no answers. And once it goes to trial, they're convicted. Obviously, they get the death penalty. All they can do is ask for mercy. They don't get it. We then see a reporter kind of emerge in the story who plays the Truman, but he doesn't act anything like Truman Capote, but he's the kind of equivalent of a Truman Capote. He's the one that gets to know them, and they open up to him. And basically, they're sentenced to die. And right before Hickok dies, he looks at them before he's going up to hang. And they said, "Is there anything you would like to say?" And he said, "Just that I have no grudges. You guys are sending me to a world that's much better than this one ever was." And then we're taken to Perry's cell, where he's with the reverend that he called at the very beginning in the film. And who does he flash back to but his father? He talks to a memory of his father. That's what comes up. And he said, "You know, the two of us at one time, we almost had it." He built this hunting lodge. And it was a beautiful home. We were, for the first time, going to have a home. Us. And this was great, and it was beautiful. But nobody ever came. And then he tells a story that one night his father looked at him and said, "Take a look." And we wrote the memory that he flashed back to. That was the memory that pushed him over, and that was his last thought before he's going to die, is that memory. And his father pulled the trigger, but the gun wasn't loaded. And then Perry went this way, and that was it. Never saw him again. And he said, "But, I will miss him. He's probably the only one I will." And the Reverend looks at him and says, "Well, I'm glad that you don't hate him anymore, or have forgiven him." He said, "Oh, but I do. I hate him and I love him." And as he's saying this, it's raining outside. And it almost looks as though those are tears coming down Robert Blake's face. And the way he delivers this, that scene, the tone of voice, is so flawless. And then he's taken in, and we just hear his heart pounding. And we see the Reverend there reading from the Bible as they're putting it. We hear Robert Blake say, "Is God here?" And right before he said, but before they set up, he turns and looks at one, and he flashes and sees an image of his father again. And then he turns back, and the Reverend, he asks that question: could God be in a place like this? Something this ghastly? I mean, is he here? The mask goes over, the noose drops. See him go down, bounce back up. Credit in cold blood. Watching that film is the kind of film that when that's over, you sort of turn and look at the person with you, and it's like, let's go get a cup of it. Like, I have to decompress a little bit after having seen that. And what's so refreshing about seeing this movie, even though it's a tough movie to watch, is to see a movie cover subject matter so grisly, so vulgar, where there's such, a crime that had no humanity, and them bringing such humanity to this story. How it brings out empathy in a way that you didn't think would be there, because these are two horrible men. But empathy, they made it a human story, not a monster story, which is what made it so much more effective and so much more disturbing. It's not monsters that do these things. It's human beings. How did they get to that place? What role as a society do we play, or did we play, in getting them there? Will there ever be an end to stuff like this? Good questions, but no real answers. But the questions do deserve to be asked. And seeing one asked in this type of fashion is quite an experience. So if you've never seen this film, do yourself a favor. You need to watch this film, and I guarantee you one time will not be enough. Trust me. Until next time, thanks.